Hello everybody, my name is ManuS and welcome to another MTGCardmarket video series of mine. After having tried a couple of brews in the last videos that I wrote about with new cards from Ada Revolt, I figured it's about time to go back to something more trusty, since these brews all haven't worked out too well so far, and the format has shifted a bit in a way that made me want to revisit my trusty old Esper Delve deck, partially because it got Fatal Push, which is actually a huge boon for the deck. Not having to ramp the opponent early on with pass is pretty good already, and getting to run more than 4 fairly universal 1 mana removal spells is pretty great. So that helps a lot with some of the tighter matchups like Burn, and also helps a lot against the Black-Green X matchups, which previously were like 50-50, and also obviously with decks like Death Shadow Aggro. Also, I want to say, basically in the past, like Suicide Zoo has been a pretty comfortable matchup for me with this deck, which is part of why I went back to it, since Death Shadow Aggro, while not being Suicide Zoo exactly, kind of works a lot similar. It has some more disruption, but it still also is very threat light, so the matchup should probably be even better than it was against Suicide Zoo, and I was fairly happy and comfortable with that already. So that seems like a solid environment to give Esper Delve another shot. Sure, we lost Gitaxian Probe, but I only ran 3, and they were kind of expendable in a way. The deck wasn't super dependent on that, in my opinion, which is why I went down to 3 in the first place, among others, because the cost of life is actually pretty real. Alright, so let's talk about the list real quick. So as removal spells, we have 2 Paths to Exile still, since there's a couple of things that you want to exile, for example, Wormcoil Engine out of Tron, and there's some 4+, like 5+ casting cost creatures, like especially Reality Smasher out of the 2 Eldrazi decks, namely Eldrazi Tron and Banned Eldrazi, and just some persist creatures and stuff. So there's just a couple of things that we still want to pass that are either 5+ or need to be exiled, and also having more than 4 1 mana removal is really great in a deck like this. So 6 seems like a nice amount together with the 3 Snapcasters. That gives us ample removal when we need it, without flooding too heavily when we don't, because Snapcaster is so flexible. So 2 paths for Fatal Push. Deck has some good ways of activating push. Basically, we have 9 fetch lands, and for Bubble, which is nice, Bubble is like another free way to activate a Fatal Push, especially on an opposing turn, because we often can't hold back our fetch lands because we play so few lands that we usually need to crack them on our turn a lot of the time, but we don't need to do that with a Bubble, so we can just let Bubble stick around to instant speed, kill something that costs 3 or 4 with push, which is really nice. I basically replaced the 3 Gitaxian Probe with a 6th removal slot and 2 Sleight of Hand. Sleight of Hand is just not too great, but it's solid, and I kind of wanted to have some more cantrips for the Delve, and also to stay at the 17 lands that I'm running, and replacing 3 unselective cantrips with 2 much more selective cantrips seems like a decent exchange to still stick to 17 lands. Basically, the rest hasn't really changed. There's still like 3 Linging Souls, 3 Tasigur, and 4 Gormak Angler as threats, 3 Snapcaster Mages as like a mix between threats and flexible interaction. The cantrips are still 4 Zero Visions, 4 Bubble, 4 Swordscore, and now the 2 Sleight of Hand in addition. As counterspells, there's still 2 Spellsnare, simply because while the card is really efficient, it's also quite limited, and there's not every deck has a lot of good targets for it, so 2 is like a pretty balanced amount, especially with Snapcaster to reuse it if the opponent runs enough targets for it. 2 Stubborn Denial to have more 1-mana interaction. Basically, in this deck it's a 1-mana negate most of the time, which is really great and very efficient in this type of tempo aggro control style deck. And 2 Deprive simply as like as counterspell. Basically, the card is mostly counterspell in this deck. Just 2 mana, stop whatever you want to stop, which is pretty nice. And the 4 discard spells to have some more cheap cards to fuel Delve, and also to set up like a turn 2 or turn 3 Delve creature with protection, basically clearing the opposing removal for our threat and then dropping our Delve Fatty, for example. And it's split between Inquisition and Thoughtseize simply because losing too much life can be problematic in various matchups, especially against Burn. And Inquisition hits most of the things we want to hit, but there's some matchups like Tron or Ad Nauseam, like some of these big mana combo decks that have expensive cards in them as key cards. We want some Thoughtseize to have enough ways to interact with their essential cards, basically. And yeah, the mana base is just 9 fetch lands, 1 of each Shock Duel, 2 island, 1 swamp, no basic planes in the main, just in the sideboard when we want an 18th land, and when we want to like take less damage from our mana base, like against Burn, for example. And 2 Darkslick Shores as like additional blue-black dual lands that don't deal us damage, once again to balance out the damage we take from our own deck for matchups like Burn and other more aggressive matchups where it matters. The sideboard is 2 Disenchant, especially for Affinity, but also for a variety of other decks that have targets in this game. Bogles, Lantern Control, Infect, and so on. Or Storm even. There's a bunch of decks that have some targets where we really want to bring in Disenchant. It's just a versatile card to have access to, especially with Snapcaster Mage. The 4 Lingering Souls for grindy matchups, Infect and Affinity. More Stubborn Denial for control and spell-heavy combo decks. Card is just brutally efficient. 2 Sorrow of Temptation, which I especially like against black-green mid-range decks, especially Abzan, because they have more good targets. But since Fatal Push got printed, they are less reliable in these matchups, but they're still fine. We have Stubborn Denial to sometimes set them up at 5. Or like the discard to protect them a bit. And we also have multiple like must kill, hard to kill threats, so they won't always have an answer left. And if it lives, it's a pretty big deal. And it's especially good against the Eldrazi decks, which have very limited answers and a ton of good targets. So it's mostly there for like Death Shadow aggro and the Eldrazi decks, but can also come in against the black-green mid-range decks, for example. And it's even solid against Tron, because like snatching their Wormcoil Engine is a pretty big deal. And they have very few ways to deal with the Soa, actually. So the card has some really nice uses in a bunch of matchups. Like in the past I really liked it. I have to test it more to see how much I like it still with the print of cards like Fatal Push, which definitely hurts this card quite a bunch, because before a lot of decks that now have Fatal Push had very limited answers to Soa. 2 Surgical Extraction as a concession that Dredge is still potentially a deck, and wherever else it might be useful against like some graveyard center decks and some combo matchups, basically. 2 Collective Brutality as additional discard against spell-heavy decks, but also as basically anti-burn card. This is one of the strongest cards against burn, in my opinion, in the format right now. Basically killing one of their creatures, gaining 2 life, and discarding one of their burn spells at the cost of 2 mana is just great. I mean, like, you usually have cards that you can easily discard that don't matter too much, and trading them 1/1 at the cost of 0 mana basically with burns resources is great. It's basically like a 3/3, but one that costs 2 mana, which is exactly what you need. You need efficient interaction. You don't need too much card advantage, even you just need to be able to trade 1/1 with as many as their cards, because their plan is basically built around not interacting and therefore not trading. So making them trade 3 cards for 3 of our cards is exactly what they don't want. Since gaining 2 life usually means they need 1 more burn spell, killing their creature also means they need 1 more burn spell at least, and discarding their best burn spell, well, requires them to have 1 more burn spell, because one of their burn spells just got discarded without effect. So yeah, that's really great, and it's also nice against some tribal decks like Merfolk, Elves, all these decks with a lot of like small units. Some of the company mana elf decks. It's just a very versatile card that can come in a bunch of matchups. Like against company decks, you can even like discard a card to hopefully hit a chord or company in their hand and kill one of their mana dogs or something, which is great, or like kill their Voice of Resurgence frontside and stuff like that. Next we have Flaying Tendrils, which is basically there to wipe the board against Affinity and the mentioned Collected Company decks, which have a lot of Persisters and Voice of Resurgence, and a lot of their stuff dies to it. And also against these like tribal decks that can give this deck real fits, especially Merfolk. So this is just a really nice sweeper and just the right size of sweeper for the format, for the decks that give this deck problems basically. 1 counter scroll as like an additional negate type effect to bring in against control and combo, just to round out the disruption interaction package, and the basic planes to go up to 18 lands in some matchups like against burn, and to reduce like the damage we take from fetching white mana basically. Like if I bring in Soa, I usually want the 18th land. In the past it also meant that we would sideboard out Gitaxian Probe, and then we want the 18th land if we lose 3 cantrips. Now that we don't have Gitaxian Probe anymore, that won't work exactly that way, but the Plains is still a good sideboard card, I think, for now, simply because yeah, there's just some matchups where you really want that 18th land, and there's some matchups where you really want to like reduce the damage you take from your mana base. And also there is some matchups that just attack your mana, like that have Ghost Quarters, that have passes, and having more things to fetch for their passes and stuff is really nice. Like against Absinthe, for example, they have 4 pass and we want to bring in Soa, so bringing in that extra basic land and that 18th land alongside Soars is a pretty nice option there, for example. Alright, that's it for the update on the deck and the deck tech for now. Next I'm gonna jump into a competitive league with the deck and we'll see how we're doing. I'm gonna play 3 matches and walk you through the matches as usual and draw my conclusions afterwards a bit of how like the things went. But yeah, just looking at like MTG Goldfish or something like that to check what the modern metagame is right now, like online. It seemed like it's yeah, quite a good field to try and bring back Esper Delve, since this deck has been doing phenomenal work for me in the past, and it's also just a blast to play, and definitely a fan favorite. It's still one of my videos, like my initial Esper Delve video series is still one of my most viewed video series that I've made so far. So I hope you guys enjoy seeing me getting back to this deck and updating it, and hopefully also succeeding with it again and proving that it is a viable option again. Alright, so see you in a moment with the first match. Stay tuned.